Fees Must Fall activist Kanya Cekeshe could be free by Christmas. Government today announced that thousands of offenders would be considered for pardons and remissions to mark Reconciliation Day.
The remissions will not include sexual offenders, child abusers and murderers. Earlier on, I spoke to the Justice Minister Ronald Lamola, who said Cekeshe was one of over 14,000 offenders being considered.
What has been announced is a remission for various categories of offenders, which, with exceptions for those that are convicted for rape, murder, armed robbery, those that have been declared as violent or dangerous criminals and so forth. So the remission is that it will be given to about 14,000 incarcerated offenders inside our correctional facilities. And those offenders that are going to be given this remission, it's about 12 months remission. And there are those that are of low risk with an additional 12 months for the low risk. So the people you have asked me about, they belong to a category that will get 12 months. So this remission process will start with women, with the youth, with children, and people with disabilities to be looked at, and because they qualify, and they will also be granted in that regard. So it does not mean that you are now qualified or given parole, but it means that you are now eligible for parole, and you can be released upon the processes of parole being undertaken and so forth. So it can happen at any time. Hence, it is difficult for us to give a specific date that this one will be released in the next hour or tomorrow. There's a process that the officials and the parole boards needs to undertake.
And to be clear, Minister, as you say, it is still a process. So it's not a fait accompli that they will be released. But if you say we cannot give an exact date, it implies that it is certain that they will be granted parole. Am I misunderstanding?
No, you are not misunderstanding. I'm saying they are eligible. For example, with regard to the king, he has been a good citizen. He has undergone all our processes in our facilities. So they are eligible, and their sentence has been cut short, which means they are eligible immediately with that process having been undertaken. Not only for them, why it is also difficult for me to give you a specific date, is because this is not only about Kaya and the king. It is about many of the inmates in our centers. So an uncle or a brother of someone who is in our cell will also call me and say, when is my cousin going to be released? I will not be able to give a date of 14,000 people. So that's why it has to be done by the processes of the parole boards and the processes by the officials, so that meticulous details are taken by the biometrics, the pre-release programs that include the relapse, so that we don't also have a situation of relapse. So it's a very tedious process. It's not easy to give each and every offender dates. But the reason we're able to say these two qualify is because they are almost known. So by the time we went to the press conference, we could be able to see in terms of which date where they were supposed to be going on parole. And so we are aware. We know that they are eligible.
And with regards, you say you could already foresee the dates that they would qualify for. Are you able to just confirm that for us?
Yes, it's 12 months.
Okay. So let's talk about these two in particular. As you say, their stories in particular have been within the public domain. Now, with regards to King Kaya Dalindyebo, there was also the issue of a presidential pardon that was sought. He applied for one. The DOJ itself made recommendation to the president. Is he qualifying for a remission or presidential pardon?
He has qualified for a remission. The president, when he has made a decision on a presidential pardon, he will announce. This one is different. A presidential pardon and a remission is different. And hence we have explained that the presidential pardon is something that has come through our department, is on the table of the president. It will still be considered at the appropriate and at the right time. At this stage, what the king qualifies for is the remission, which makes him eligible at this stage for the issues of parole and for the issues of him being reintegrated with community, victim offender dialogue, and the various programs. What we also mentioned at the press conference is that since 1994, a presidential pardon has not been granted to somebody who has been in our cells. But it's not something which cannot be done. It is a thing that is looked at on its own merits and the circumstances permitting and various issues that the president then considers. On a day-to-day basis, the president does grant pardons. At this stage, what we have seen and what he has granted on most of the pardons have been of people who are outside. You will find that a person has committed a crime in 1970, 1980, is now working somewhere, but the fact that he has got a criminal record is hindering him from progression, either in his job or in the community for whatever reason. Then such people usually apply and the president will grant them pardons. But there will be those that still applies and the president will say no, they cannot be granted pardon because of various reasons. There is no clear, hard and fast rule.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Minister, because in the case of Kanya Cekeshe, there's been a great deal of public outcry, public interest on his future. Somebody who was involved in what many have said is a worthy cause, that of advancements of the curriculum for people at higher education. So him having a criminal record, shouldn't that at least limit him in whatever ventures he may want to pursue? In other words, does he qualify for presidential pardon? And has an application of such been made?
Yes, there was an application that was made through my predecessor in our office, and I was shocked when I was criticized for saying we'll continue to help him, because it's our job to help anyone with this application, but we're criticized for saying we'll help him. So there is an application that is on the table that he has put, but we are unable to proceed with that application because he has appealed the sentence. So we will have to pend it and wait the outcomes of the appeal, because the appeal may be in his favor or it may not be in his favor. So when it is not in his favor, he may still want to say he wants us to look into his application for a pardon. It will be at that stage that we will be able to make a recommendation to the president whether we recommend that he must be granted a pardon or he should not be granted, and what are the bases. But there are various factors that are looked into which are not hard and fast ruled, as I've said. The age of the offender, the possibility of re-offending, the fact that the offender has shown remorse, and all those kind of things are taken into consideration.
And mental health is something that you also raise, Minister, in looking at these various qualifications. In the case of Kanya Cekeshe, was that a factor? There were reports suggesting that he is suffering a great deal as a result of him being in prison. And some even find it sensational, and I'm borrowing from just various reports saying that he still had 6 years left on his sentence, that he's been granted this remission. Was there pressure being brought to bear?
This process of remission, as you will have seen, the numbers are very huge. It's a meticulous process, so there is no pressure that could have been brought to us. It is a process that I found on the table and I took forward because we have got 37% overcrowding in our cells, and the international norm is that you must not go beyond 37% overcrowding. Even this remission still does not really help us that much because it only remit about 8.99% of our inmates, which will now remain with 26% overcrowding. And in an overcrowded environment, it's very difficult to do rehabilitation, to correct offenders, and to do various programs that are very important for their rehabilitation and reintegration in society. So if you look, we were now tendering on going beyond the 37%. And in some of our cells, you will find that it's almost double and so forth. So this eases that congestion. It enables us to do our job. But also the people that are going to be given this process are people who have undergone our rehabilitation process. They have undergone processes of a psychiatrist, psychologist, and we believe that from our side, we have done our best in terms of giving them what should be for them to be good members of the community when they are reintegrated.
So, as you say, 2/3 of that are already parolees or probationers. That leaves 10% from correctional service facilities who are going to be released. Are those figures correct?
Yes, they are correct.
So of those 10% who are in correctional centres, what are the unique circumstances that you consider?
For who?
For those who are in correctional facilities. That's why I was asking of that.
Yes. Is the low, is whether it's a low risk, high risk, and issues that I've said before, that there are exclusions for those who are imprisoned for murder, armed robbery, and so forth. But the others who are low risk, for example, you will not be able to say Kaya, for example, is a high risk person if he's taken back to the community, or the king, as you're giving us an example. You can't say he's a high risk. You know that there might be issues and so forth, but it's not a person that you'll hear that tomorrow has committed armed robbery, or there is another kind of violent to society. So those are kind of factors that are being considered. What are the probability of reoffending?
It's interesting that you should say that, Minister, because there was a time those who were critical of the attempts to have the king released, saying that isn't this a way of giving undue power to traditional leaders who take the law into their own hands, as some were criticizing him of having done at the same time, and he himself saying that as a king he doesn't belong in prison. So don't you think your critics would then go back?
But also the law says everyone must be treated equally. So if everyone is benefiting, why would he not benefit just on the basis that he's a king?
Okay.
So he must also be treated equally like any other person. For example, the king has undergone all our processes of rehabilitation that we do with all the inmates. So he was treated like any other inmate. And that's why you will see that he also, like any other person, he's undergoing all these processes. And he is just benefiting because a particular category of inmates are benefiting.
All right, so Minister, I want to talk about recidivism and the track record since 2005, I think, to 2015. You say there's a margin of 0.24%, 0.25% of people who end up being rearrested. Is this the reason why you have revised the category of prisoners who can be released during this 2019 remission period?
Yes, because we have learned lessons from the previous remissions, various things, for example, with community corrections, victims offender dialogue, but also to give them some kind of support. For example, when you look at those that reoffended, were people that when they were released, they could not be accepted by their families, by communities. So as he or she is released, they don't know where to go to. Were these people who were accused of murder and sexual offenses? Yeah, and for example, sexual offenses, if you look at it, it's one of the most where people recommit kind of offenses. So, and even murder sometimes. So that's why, and also the reality that our society today is a violent society, and sexual offenses are rife. So we are also sending a message to society that we are sensitive to these issues. We are sensitive to the challenges that the communities are facing. Even though we may want to find some kind of people who have been rehabilitated, but we have to be sensitive to this aspect. I'm glad you speak about being sensitive to the victims of these crimes. I'd like to talk about gender-based violence. As you know, as a program, we've been several times to prisons speaking to inmates, and some of those are women who were victims of gender-based violence, women who either killed or ended up harming someone because they were victims or they're protecting somebody who was. Some of the people who are being released, are they accused of gender-based violence? No, no one. We have said from the categories, no one who is accused of gender-based violence should qualify. What about those who were victims of gender-based violence and ended up killing or harming someone as a result of trying to protect themselves or someone else? As we have said, it will have to be looked at with the processes of looking to the amendment of the Criminal Procedure Act and the various laws. But as things stand now, we had to exclude murder because if we allow the processes of murder, it will open a floodgate for various people that have been convicted of such an offense.
And we'll just take a listen to what the EFF leader, Julius Malema, had to say about this special remissions.
The president, when he speaks about Cekeshe, he says, and this young man that the EFF has been campaigning that he must be released, he will be released. And I thought I must brief you before we announce, because you are the ones who have been championing the release of this young man. So we thank Ramaphosa for an early Christmas, because we've been wanting to coexist and learn from people like Cekeshe and King Dalindyebo. And we still hope that all of those who have criminal records emanating from fees must fall, those criminal records will be cancelled, and they too will continue to enjoy their freedoms because they were fighting for a just cause.